She was a poor widow with 3 daughters, struggling to survive. But when she found a dying Viking warrior in her barn, she never imagined that moment would change their lives forever. The widow's struggle. In the harsh lands of Northumbria, where the sun showed no mercy and the wind carried broken promises, lived Astrid Bjornsdottir in a crumbling stone cottage that was falling apart like her dreams. At 32 years old, this woman with honey-colored eyes and hands weathered by work had known more pain than many experience in a lifetime. Her husband, Eric, had died 2 years ago in an accident while transporting livestock, leaving her alone with 3 young daughters and debts that grew like weeds in the wasteland. The girls, Freya, aged 12, Sigrid, aged 9, and little Helga at 6, had learned to live with empty stomachs and worn-out shoes. Astrid worked from before dawn until after nightfall, washing clothes for the wealthy families of the settlement, sewing until her fingers bled, and selling the few vegetables she managed to grow in her small garden with scarce water. The neighbors looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. "That woman should return to her family in the south," the ladies whispered when they saw her pass through the main square carrying baskets of dirty laundry that weighed more than her own daughters. "She has no way to support those girls alone. It's shameful to see them so thin and unkempt." But Astrid had a silent pride that refused to break. Every night, after putting her daughters to bed with invented stories to distract them from hunger, she sat on the small porch of her cottage and looked at the stars, promising herself she would find a way to give them a better life. Her grandmother had taught her that strong women don't give up. They find strength where others see impossibility. The barn discovery. One October morning, when the air was beginning to chill and the year's meager harvests had ended, Astrid headed to the abandoned barn that stood half a mile from her house. The wooden building had belonged to the land's previous owners, and though now in ruins, she sometimes found rusty tools or pieces of metal she could sell in the settlement. The barn smelled of old hay and rotting wood. Rays of sunlight filtered through loose boards, creating patterns of light and shadow on the dust-covered floor. Astrid walked carefully, alert for snakes and rats that might hide among the debris. It was then she saw something that made her heart stop. A motionless human figure in the barn's darkest corner. At first, she thought she'd found a corpse. The man lay on his side, long black hair spread across his face, dressed in leather clothes that had seen better days. His bronzed skin was pale, and a dark stain of dried blood marked his shirt on the right side. Astrid approached slowly, her maternal instinct fighting against primitive fear. When she knelt beside him, she could see he was still breathing. Though barely, he was a young man, perhaps 30 years old, with strong features and scars that spoke of a hard life. From his appearance and clothing, he was clearly from one of the wild Norse clans of the far north, warriors that settlers both feared and hated. Finding him here in settled territory meant he was probably a fugitive. Astrid knew she should leave, find the sheriff, let others deal with this problem. The wild Norse warriors were considered dangerous savages, enemies of civilized society. Helping one could mean trouble with authorities or, worse, endangering her daughters. But when she saw the infected wound on his side and heard his labored breathing, she couldn't simply leave. "Mother of mercy," she murmured, gently touching his fever-hot forehead. "What am I going to do with you?" As if hearing her voice, the man slowly opened his eyes. They were black as night, filled with pain, but also with a fierceness that made Astrid instinctively retreat. For a moment, they stared at each other, two strangers united by circumstances neither had chosen. He tried to sit up, but the effort was too much, and he collapsed again. "Don't move," Astrid said in Norse, though she wasn't sure he understood. "You're badly hurt." To her surprise, he responded in broken but understandable Norse. Will you turn me in?" The question hung in the barn's dusty air. Astrid studied his face, seeing beyond the strange skin and different features. She saw a human being suffering, a man who perhaps had family waiting for him somewhere. She saw what she had seen in the mirror for the last 2 years, someone struggling to survive in a world that showed no mercy. "No," she finally responded, "but you need medical help. This wound is infected." He closed his eyes as if making a difficult decision. "My name is Bjorn," he murmured. "It means bear. Fitting. I've always been alone like a solitary bear." "Astrid," she responded, "and if you're going to stay in my barn, you won't be alone much longer." The healing begins. Over the following days, Astrid developed a dangerous routine. Each morning, after sending her daughters to collect firewood and fetch water, she would sneak to the barn with bandages made from her own underskirts, medicinal herbs she'd learned to use from her mother, and what little food she could afford to share. Bjorn was a difficult patient. His pride prevented him from accepting help easily, and each time she approached to change his bandages, he tensed like a wild animal ready to attack. But Astrid had raised 3 daughters alone. She knew how to deal with male stubbornness. "You can stay here suffering from pride," she told him one morning while preparing a new herbal poultice. "Or you can let a mother help you heal, so you can return to your people. Your choice." Something in her direct but not hostile tone managed to penetrate Bjorn's defenses. Slowly, he began allowing her to treat his wound, give him water, and small portions of food. During those silent moments, Astrid noticed things about him that contradicted everything she'd heard about wild warriors. His hands, though calloused and marked with scars, were gentle when taking the water she offered. His eyes, when not clouded by pain, showed sharp intelligence and deep sadness she recognized. And when he spoke, his voice had a poetic quality that made the simplest words sound like music. "Why are you helping me?" he asked one afternoon when his fever had lowered enough for real conversation. "Your people and mine are enemies." Astrid sat on a pile of old hay, considering her answer. "My people," she said finally, "are my 3 daughters. Everything else is just complications." She paused, looking through cracks in the wall toward her small cottage in the distance. "Besides, I've been alone against the world for 2 years. I know what it feels like to be considered an enemy simply for existing." The daughters discover the secret. It was that night when Astrid's daughters discovered her secret. Freya, the eldest, had noticed her mother disappearing each day and returning with less food than she'd left to find. The 12-year-old had her mother's stubborn determination and the protective instinct of an older sister who had grown up too fast. She followed Astrid to the barn and saw through a crack in the wall as her mother cared for the wounded stranger. Freya ran back home, her childish mind filling with all the terrible tales she'd heard about wild northern warriors who stole children and massacred entire families.
"Mother is helping a savage warrior!" she shouted to her younger sisters, who immediately began crying in fear.
By the time Astrid returned home, she found her 3 daughters huddled on the bed, trembling with terror. "Is it true, Mother?" Freya asked with trembling voice. "Is there a wild warrior in the old barn?" Astrid sat on the bed and drew her daughters toward her. For a moment, she considered lying, inventing some story to calm them, but she'd raised these girls with honesty, even when the truth was painful. "Yes," she said softly, "there's a wounded man in the barn. He's from the wild clans, but he's alone and needs help. He won't hurt anyone." "But aren't the wild warriors evil?" asked Sigrid, the middle one with wide, frightened eyes. "People say many things about others they don't know," Astrid responded, hugging them tighter. "This man has a name like us, has wounds like us, and is alone like us. I can't simply let him die." Freya, always the bravest of the three, separated from the embrace and looked directly into her mother's eyes. "Do you want us to meet him?" The question surprised Astrid. She'd expected resistance, tears, perhaps even a threat to tell the authorities. But Freya had the same silent compassion she'd inherited from her mother. "Only if you want to," she responded carefully. "But you must promise not to tell anyone in the settlement." People wouldn't understand. The three girls looked at each other, communicating with that silent telepathy only siblings possess. Finally, Freya nodded. "We want to meet him," she said on behalf of all three. The first meeting. The next day, Astrid brought her daughters to the barn. Bjorn had improved considerably. He could sit without help, and his wound had begun healing cleanly. When he saw the girls hiding behind their mother, his eyes softened in a way Astrid had never seen. "These are my daughters," Astrid said softly. "Freya, Sigrid, and Helga." Bjorn observed them for a long moment. Then he spoke in careful Norse. "They're beautiful, like wildflowers. They have their mother's eyes." Little Helga, the youngest, stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of very young children. "Why is your hair so long?" she asked. Bjorn smiled, and Astrid realized it was the first time she'd seen him do so. The smile completely transformed his face, showing the gentle man hiding behind the warrior. "In my clan, long hair means wisdom and connection with the spirits of our ancestors." "Do you have daughters like us?" Sigrid asked shyly. Bjorn's smile faded, replaced by sadness so deep it made Astrid's heart compress. "I had a family," he said softly. "They were killed by raiders 2 years ago. That's why I'm alone." The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief. Astrid understood that loss in ways words couldn't express. Her daughters, even being so young, recognized the kind of sadness they'd seen in their mother's eyes after their father's death. Freya slowly approached and sat beside Bjorn. "We lost our father, too," she said with the seriousness of someone who had grown up too fast. "But Mother says when we lose people we love, we have to take better care of the people we still have." Bjorn looked at the 12-year-old with astonishment. "You're very wise for your age." "I have to be," Freya responded simply. "I'm the oldest sister." From that day forward, visits to the barn became a family adventure. The girls helped their mother carry food and water. Bjorn began telling them stories of his clan, of life in the northern mountains, of traditions his grandparents had taught him. In return, the girls taught him words in their dialect and told him about their life in the settlement. Astrid watched these interactions with a mixture of joy and concern. She saw her daughters flourish under male attention they'd lost with their father's death. She saw how Bjorn transformed in the girls' presence, as if their innocence and acceptance were healing wounds deeper than any medicine could reach. But she also knew this situation couldn't last forever. The craftsman's gift. Weeks passed like pages of a book Astrid had never expected to read. Bjorn recovered completely from his wound, but instead of leaving as both had assumed he would, he began finding reasons to stay just a few more days. First, it was to repair the barn's leaking roof, then to reinforce the fence protecting Astrid's small garden from wild rabbits. "I can't leave knowing rain falls inside where I sleep," he explained, with a smile he no longer tried to hide. "And that garden needs proper protection before winter." Astrid pretended to protest, but secretly she was glad for every excuse he found to stay. His presence had brought something to her home she hadn't known was missing, the feeling that she wasn't alone against the world. For the first time in 2 years, someone else carried part of the weight she'd been carrying alone. Bjorn worked mainly at night or in the early dawn hours, when neighbors were less likely to see him. He had a natural ability to repair things Astrid had assumed were hopelessly broken. The well that had given poor water for months began flowing clean after he cleaned and repaired it. The wood stove that had smoked terribly now burned efficiently, warming the entire cottage. But it was the evenings when things truly came alive. After the girls finished their meager schoolwork, Bjorn would sit with them in the barn and pull out pieces of wood, leather, and stone from a worn bag he always carried. With these simple tools, he created marvels. "In my clan," he explained, while carving a small owl from a piece of cedar wood, "we believe every object should have beauty in addition to function. A knife that only cuts is just metal. A beautiful knife that cuts well is a gift from the gods." Freya watched, fascinated, as his hands transformed ordinary materials into art. "Can you teach me to do that?" "I can teach you," Bjorn responded, "but first you must learn to see the beauty that already exists inside the wood." "I only release it." Astrid watched from the barn entrance, pretending to mend clothes, while actually studying the man who had transformed their lives so quietly. There was something hypnotic about the way he worked, as if in meditation. His large, calloused hands moved with a delicacy that contrasted with his rugged appearance. The gift of turquoise. One afternoon, Bjorn showed Astrid a necklace he had been working on secretly. It was made of small turquoise pieces he'd carved into leaf shapes, connected by fine leather cords braided with incredible precision. "It's beautiful," Astrid murmured, gently touching the polished stones. "It must be worth a lot of money." "It's for you," he said simply, placing it around her neck before she could protest. "A gift for saving my life." Astrid brought her hands to the necklace, feeling the soft weight of the stones against her skin. No one had given her something so beautiful in years. Perhaps never. Eric had been a good man, but romantic gifts hadn't been part of their practical marriage. "I can't accept this," she protested weakly. "You should sell it to someone who can pay you well." "Who says you're not paying me well?" Bjorn responded, his eyes meeting hers. "Your friendship, your daughter's laughter, the home you've given me, that's worth more than any money." That night, after putting the girls to bed, Astrid sat on her porch, touching the necklace and watching the stars. The weight of the turquoise against her skin was a constant reminder that her life had taken a turn she'd never imagined. She had become a woman who hid a warrior in her barn, who looked forward each day just to see his smile, who had grown accustomed to having a man she could trust. The realization terrified and excited her in equal parts. The business idea. It was Freya who suggested the idea that would change everything. One morning, while eating tortillas made with the last flour they had, the 12-year-old studied her mother with eyes too wise for her age. "Mother," she said carefully, "why don't we sell the things Bjorn makes in the settlement?" Astrid almost choked on her watered-down coffee. "Freya, we can't." "Why not?" the girl interrupted. "No one has to know who makes them. You can say you got them from traveling traders. Those rich people in the settlement pay good money for beautiful things like what he makes." Astrid looked at her daughter with astonishment. At 12, Freya already understood the economic and social complexities of their situation better than many adults. "It's very risky," Astrid murmured, "if anyone discovers, but it's also very necessary," Freya replied, gesturing toward her worn-out shoes and their meager breakfast. "Look how we live, Mother. Bjorn can help us, but only if we let him." That afternoon, Astrid presented the idea to Bjorn. To her surprise, he didn't immediately reject the suggestion. "I've been thinking the same thing," he admitted. "I have skills, and you have needs. It would be foolish not to find a way for us to work together." "But if someone recognizes the northern style, they won't recognize anything," he interrupted with a cunning smile. "I can make pieces that look Norse, Saxon, or from anywhere you want. Craftsmanship is a universal language. I just need to know what kind of things those rich people like to buy." The first sale. The first sales expedition was terrifying. Astrid dressed in her best dress, 2 years old and mended multiple times, and carried to the settlement a basket with 5 pieces Bjorn had created. 2 necklaces of Norse design, a set of small decorative knives, and 2 carved figures of Christian saints so beautiful they seemed to have life. The first shop she visited belonged to Jarl Magnus's merchant, a man who sold imported goods to the region's wealthy families. When Astrid showed him the pieces, his eyes immediately lit up. "Where did you get these marvels?" he asked, examining one of the knives with an expert eye. "The craftsmanship is exceptional. I got them from a trader who passed through my farm," Astrid stammered, praying her nervousness wasn't obvious. "He was from the south, I think from the Baltic lands." The merchant studied the pieces for several more minutes, clearly impressed by the work's quality. "I'll buy all of them," he finally declared. "And if you can get more pieces of this quality, I have clients who would pay very well for them." Astrid returned home with more money than she'd seen together in months. When she showed the coins to Bjorn and the girls, the barn filled with shouts of joy and spontaneous hugs. "We can buy real flour," Rosa shouted, jumping up and down. "And new shoes," Helga added. Freya, always the most practical, was already doing calculations. "If Bjorn can make 5 pieces per week, and Mother can sell them for these prices—" Bjorn watched the scene with an expression of astonishment that gradually transformed into something deeper. Astrid recognized that look. It was the expression of a man who had found a purpose he'd believed lost forever. "I never thought," he murmured, "that I would feel useful again, that I would be part of a family again." The word family hung in the barn's air like an unspoken promise. Astrid felt her heart accelerate because she'd been thinking the same thing, not daring to voice it. The months of prosperity. The months that followed were the most prosperous the family had known since Eric's death. Bjorn worked tirelessly, creating increasingly elaborate and beautiful pieces. Astrid had developed a sharp eye for what would sell well and had established relationships with several merchants in nearby settlements. But more important than the money were the more subtle changes in their home. The girls laughed more frequently. Astrid had bought a new dress for the first time in years. The cottage had been repaired and improved to the point where they no longer feared winter storms. And in the evenings, when the girls were asleep, Astrid and Bjorn would sit in the barn talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his clan's traditions, about the freedom of living under the stars, about the pain of losing everything he'd loved. She told him about her dreams of giving her daughters a real education, about the difficulties of being a single mother in a society that had no place for independent women, about the loneliness she'd carried like a second skin for 2 years. During one of those night conversations when the March air was soft and carried the scent of the first wildflowers, Bjorn took Astrid's hand in his. "There's something I need to tell you," he said softly. "My wound healed months ago. I could have left any time." Astrid felt her heart stop. "Why didn't you?" "Because I found something here I didn't know I was looking for," he responded, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I found a home. I found love. I found a reason to live that goes beyond simple survival." Astrid felt tears running down her cheeks. "I'll stay if you'll let me," he continued. "Not as a secret hidden in the barn, but as a man who is part of this family. I know it will be difficult. I know there will be problems, but I'm willing to face them if you're willing to give me a chance." Astrid's answer was a kiss she'd been waiting for months without knowing it. A kiss that tasted of promises, of second chances, of love that blooms in the most unexpected places. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Stay. Stay forever." The questions begin. Spring of 948. A Dee arrived with prosperity Astrid had never dreamed of. Their cottage had a new roof, windows with real glass, and enough food to feed a family twice as large. The girls wore shoes without holes and dresses without patches. Bjorn had built a secret workshop where he created marvels sold as the work of a craftsman from distant lands. But the merchant had begun asking more insistent questions. "My clients paid double for these pieces," he confided to Astrid. "Can't you convince your trader to come directly?" "You know how these craftsmen are," Astrid responded with a forced smile. "Very secretive about their methods." But the merchant had noticed the pieces arrived with suspicious regularity, always perfect, without the wear of having traveled hundreds of miles. His eyes narrowed as he studied Astrid's nervous face. In the settlement, the changes hadn't gone unnoticed. Women who had previously looked at Astrid with pity now watched her with envy and suspicion. "That woman has secrets," one whispered while washing at the river. "No one goes from poverty to prosperity without help, or without doing something improper." "Maybe she has a rich lover," another suggested maliciously. "Someone married, which is why she's so secretive." The rumors reached the ears of the new sheriff, Captain Håkon Thorsen. He'd arrived 2 months ago from the Danish territories after successful campaigns against rebel clans. He was thin as a whip, with cold eyes and a scar running down his cheek from ear to mouth. "Wild warriors are like wolves," he'd told the Jarl. "They seem calm when alone, but you never stop being their prey." When he heard about Astrid, a woman alone, with sudden money, avoiding questions, living isolated, Håkon felt a predator's interest. Everything deserved investigation. The discovery. Catastrophe arrived one April afternoon. 3 neighbor women appeared for a courtesy visit, obviously to satisfy their curiosity. "Astrid!" one shouted, pounding on the door. "We've come to visit you!" Astrid opened with racing heart, seeing through the back window as Bjorn worked in the barn. The women inspected every improvement, like soldiers in enemy territory. Their eyes registered every sign of prosperity, making mental calculations. "Such beautiful furniture," one exclaimed, touching the table Bjorn had carved. "And these curtains, finest quality," another added. Freya chose that moment to run in without noticing the visitors. "Mother!" she shouted excitedly. "Bjorn says the necklace for Sigrid will be ready for—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes filling with terror as she realized what she'd said. His silence was profound as a grave. The 3 women looked at each other with expressions changing from curiosity to shock. "Bjorn?" one repeated slowly. "What kind of name is that?" Astrid felt the ground opening beneath her feet. "It's the nickname Freya gave her doll," she stammered. "You know how children are." But the women knew the difference between childish fantasy and accidental reality. Their eyes narrowed. Before anyone could respond, the back door opened. Bjorn entered, worried by the shouts. He stopped upon seeing the strange women. It was too late. "A wild warrior!" one visitor screamed. "There's a wild warrior in the house!" Chaos erupted. The women ran, stumbling toward the door, screaming about savages loose while running to the settlement as if carrying hellfire. Bjorn stood motionless, watching his world crumble. "I have to leave," he said softly. "Right now." "No," Freya clung to his arm. "This is your home." "I won't put your family in danger," Bjorn declared with fierce determination. Astrid took his face in her hands. "This is your family too. We'll face this together." But they already heard the dreaded sound, hooves approaching at gallop, male shouts, metallic clinking of weapons. Captain Håkon had gathered 12 men in 20 minutes. The word warrior was enough to justify immediate violence. "Surround the property!" he shouted. "Don't let him escape!" The arrest. Bjorn pushed Astrid and the girls into the corner. "No matter what happens, don't try to defend me. I don't want you hurt." "Bjorn!" Carmen cried. "Don't let them take you!" He knelt, hugging all 3 girls. "Be strong. Take care of your mother. Remember, everything we've shared has been real. No one can take that from us." The door exploded when Håkon kicked it. He entered with rifle aimed, followed by his men. "There's the savage!" one shouted. Bjorn stood slowly, hands visible. "I haven't hurt anyone. This family helped me when I was wounded. They're not guilty of anything." "Shut up!" Håkon struck him with the rifle butt. Bjorn doubled over but didn't fall or make a sound. Astrid stepped forward instinctively. A man roughly pushed her. "Don't touch my family!" Bjorn roared, losing self-control. "Your family?" Håkon mocked. "A Norse woman mixing with a savage warrior?" He struck Bjorn in the face, opening a bleeding cut. The girls screamed in horror. "Take this savage away," Håkon ordered. "He'll be tried for illegal trespass." As they dragged Bjorn away, he shouted, "I love you! Never forget, I love you." "And you?" Håkon turned to Astrid. "You'll be arrested for harboring an enemy. Your daughters will be given to decent families." "No!" Freya ran toward the captain. "My mother did nothing wrong." Håkon roughly pushed her. Freya fell to the ground. Astrid lunged at him like a lioness defending cubs. "Don't touch my daughters!" Håkon grabbed her by the hair and threw her against the wall. "You have a choice," he growled. "Come quietly, or we burn this cottage with everything inside." It was an impossible choice. Astrid kissed each daughter, whispering promises of love and return. "Take care of each other," she murmured. "Remember, your mother loves you more than life." As they dragged her away, Astrid saw Bjorn tied to a horse, face bruised but eyes burning with fury, promising vengeance. 3 girls clung together on the porch, watching as the 2 adults they loved most were taken away, not knowing if they'd ever see them again. The storm had arrived and destroyed everything in its path. The Allies. The women's prison smelled of mold, sweat, and despair. Astrid had been locked in a damp cell with 3 other women accused of various moral crimes. For 2 weeks, Astrid had barely eaten. Every fiber of her being screamed for her daughters, wondering where they were, if they had enough food, if anyone consoled them when they cried at night. And Bjorn, she didn't know if he was still alive. "You have a visitor," the jailer grunted one morning, opening the rusty bars. But it wasn't who Astrid expected. It was Freya, eyes red from crying, but filled with fierce determination. "Mother," she whispered through the bars, "we're going to help you." "All of us." Freya explained that she, Sigrid, and Helga had been separated among 3 families, supposedly for their moral rehabilitation. But Freya had established secret communication with her sisters. "We found proof," Freya whispered urgently. "Captain Håkon has been stealing supplies and falsifying reports." "We have documents." Hope flickered in Astrid's chest for the first time in weeks. The rescue plan came together through an unexpected network of allies. The girls had won over several young people in their foster families who were disgusted by the injustice. Most importantly, they'd gotten their evidence to a federal inspector who'd just arrived from the South, a man with a reputation for being incorruptible. The Allies. The women's prison smelled of mold, sweat, and despair. Astrid had been locked in a damp cell with 3 other women accused of various moral crimes. For 2 weeks, Astrid had barely eaten. Every fiber of her being screamed for her daughters, wondering where they were, if they had enough food, if anyone consoled them when they cried at night. And Bjorn, she didn't know if he was still alive. "You have a visitor," the jailer grunted one morning, opening the rusty bars. But it wasn't who Astrid expected. It was Freya, eyes red from crying, but filled with fierce determination. "Mother," she whispered through the bars, "we're going to help you." "All of us." Freya explained that she, Sigrid, and Helga had been separated among 3 families, supposedly for their moral rehabilitation. But Freya had established secret communication with her sisters. "We found proof," Freya whispered urgently. "Captain Håkon has been stealing supplies and falsifying reports." "We have documents." Hope flickered in Astrid's chest for the first time in weeks. The rescue plan came together through an unexpected network of allies. The girls had won over several young people in their foster families who were disgusted by the injustice. Most importantly, they'd gotten their evidence to a federal inspector who'd just arrived from the South, a man with a reputation for being incorruptible. The confrontation. When Inspector Olafsson arrived at the military fort with federal soldiers, he found Bjorn chained and beaten, but unbroken. "Captain Håkon!" the inspector roared. "You're under arrest for treason, theft of military supplies, and falsification of official documents." Håkon paled, seeing the documents in the inspector's hands, copies made by brave children determined to save their family. "That savage attacked me!" Håkon shouted desperately. "That savage," the inspector replied with disgust, "is from a clan we have peace treaties with. You arrested him and this woman illegally, without evidence of actual crimes." Within hours, both Astrid and Bjorn were freed. The reunion was a whirlwind of tears, hugs, and words of love that had been stored during weeks of separation. The girls clung to their mother as if they'd never let go, while Bjorn waited patiently for his turn, eyes shining with the same intense emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever," Astrid whispered when they were finally in each other's arms. "Never," he responded, kissing her forehead. "The promises we made are stronger than any prison." The new life. 6 months later, the family had established a prosperous craft business combining northern techniques with settled designs. Their shop attracted customers from across the region, all seeking the unique pieces born from the fusion of 2 cultures. Astrid and Bjorn had married in a ceremony honoring both Norse and settled traditions. The local priest, who had come to deeply respect the couple's genuine love, had officiated the union with words speaking of love that transcends cultural borders. The girls had flourished in this new environment of security and love. Freya had begun learning carving techniques from Bjorn, showing natural talent, promising to continue the family tradition. Sigrid had developed an exceptional eye for designs. Even little Helga contributed, helping polish stones with the seriousness of someone who knew she was an important part of something special. One afternoon, while working together in the workshop they'd built behind their new house, Astrid watched her family with a heart full of gratitude. Bjorn patiently teaching Freya how to carve an eagle figure, while Sigrid and Helga decorated necklaces with colorful beads. "What are you thinking?" Bjorn asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how the worst day of our lives became the beginning of the best," she responded. He smiled, pulling her close. "And I'm thinking that sometimes the best gifts come disguised as the worst tragedies." That night, after putting the girls to bed, Astrid and Bjorn sat on their porch, watching the stars that had been silent witnesses to their love story. "You know what I learned from all this?" Astrid murmured, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "What?" "That true love isn't just a feeling. It's a decision you make every day. To see beyond differences, to choose compassion over fear, to build bridges where others see walls." Bjorn held her tighter, thinking of the long road they'd traveled from that day in the barn to this new life they'd built together. In the distance, the soft sound of their daughter's laughter came from the bedroom, reminding them they'd created something beautiful that would last generations. A family built not on blood or tradition, but on pure love, mutual respect, and the courage to defend what's right. Their story had begun with a woman alone, fighting to survive, and a wounded warrior who'd lost all hope. It had blossomed into a family that proved every day that true love can triumph over any prejudice, any injustice, any attempt to separate what God has joined. And that, more than anything else, was the lesson they wanted to leave the world. That true love always finds a way to flourish, no matter how barren the wasteland seems. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more fascinating stories, Viking history's greatest figures and events.